Hello, welcome to the very first episode of the Velam podcast, where we talk politics, socio-economic issues, and legal and policy developments. So for the very first episode, a special episode, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. Where are we with regards to artificial intelligence? How have we integrated AI into various industries in Kenya? What are the challenges that we're encountering? What does the future look like? So for that very interesting and timely topic, I'm going to be joined by two renowned experts, Dr. Mugambi Laibuta and Quincy Otieno. And I'd let them introduce themselves. Gentlemen, take it away.
Thank you for having us. My name is Dr. Mugambi Laibuta. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I specifically work in technology and the law, advising different kinds of diverse clients in different industries on matters relating to data protection, cybersecurity, AI regulation, and I'm pleased to be here.
Hello, my name is Quincy Otieno. I'm a legal officer at Parliament. On this side, I am a writer of AI regulatory positions. I also do a bit of data protection compliance and artificial intelligence advisory to most corporate bodies.
And I am your host, Agatha Gichana, a lawyer, a journalist, and a communications specialist. So for today, artificial intelligence, it's almost as if it has become a buzzword in the tech industry. I mean, people associate artificial intelligence with ChatGPT, but really it goes beyond that, doesn't it? So just set the landscape for us. How has Kenya integrated AI? Have we adopted it into various industries? So just set the scene for us. We'll start with Daktari.
Simply, if you have a smartphone that has a calendar, if you use social media and it updates you on, so let's say, for example, you search a holiday in Mombasa and then you find a lot of adverts relating to holidays. That's the work of AI, algorithms that have used your data to learn about what you're consistently searching, what you're consistently engaging with. Now, of course, ChatGPT is the most notorious because, of course, the people want to make their work easy. Students are using ChatGPT in their assignments. If you use Google Maps, for example, to come to Oxygen, and I search that, where is Oxygen, where is Two Rivers? That's an algorithm. That's an example of AI. So it's something we've already been using. Industries, whether in public sector, private sector. For example, if you apply for a job and you hear that there have been 100,000 applications and 500 persons have been shortlisted for interviews, fine, it's not that somebody started with those hard copies. They pass through it a human resource management software, whichever it is, and it sifts through. It looks at perhaps what keywords do they need and just shortlist. So it's there. If you apply for credit in a financial institutions, some of them have your data and they can determine whether your credit worthy or not.
That's quite interesting. So basically, it simplifies processes. It saves us time. It's like a machine learning process that simplifies work and somehow mimics human capabilities.
Yes, because you see, it's a automatic decision making. It's also data intensive because you require a lot of personal data that can identify individuals, and non-personal data. So what it does, the work that perhaps an accountant would take 2-3 days to do, this algorithm, you just feed in the data and tell the algorithm what decision do you want it to make, and it sifts through. For example, for an accountant, it may want to know, are there purchases or expenses that need to be flagged because they don't have evidence? And so it looks at the data and say, there is some expenditure that there is no evidence attached, and it will highlight them. So yes.
That's quite interesting. So Quincy, do you currently know of any other areas, say education, healthcare, telecommunications, where AI has been adopted?
There are quite a number. You can start with the healthcare. There was this project in Kericho where an innovative idea came about how to do retinal scans using their mobile phones. And so the mobile phone cameras through a said application would actually scan your eyeball to detect retinopathy or to detect cataracts. And the benefit of that was when the said patients or the said persons who got their eyes scanned would go to the hospital with that report, and the doctors would make an informed decision based on that AI is determining whether you have edema, whether you have cataracts, or whether you have an eye defect, which is coming about. It was based off of the LiDAR scanners of most iPhones. So it would scan it in depth. And since it took a picture, it really had to be up close. And the efficiency of that system has really helped the people of Kericho. Education, I believe it was Equity Bank which rolled this one out. So they have a platform which is currently tailor-making curricula for students. Currently, I'm not sure which region of the country which is being implemented in, but the last time I interacted with it, I found it quite interesting because instead of now having a uniform curricula for every student, you have this one AI system, which if you feed course content, can tailor-make it according to student needs. And I was thinking about like autistic kids, children with special needs in general, how this one would impact them. I thought that's innovative. Perhaps one of the most interesting that Dr. has highlighted is credit scoring. Equity has one. Cooperative Bank already has one that's rolling. Jumia had one, which was based off of collaborating filtering. So you would pick an item, and do you know, like when you scroll at the bottom of the search page or the bottom of that recommendation page, it recommends further items that would go along with whatever item you want to buy. That is an AI that picks off of other pages which you've clicked on their website, and it tracks your movement. And it suggests further items that possibly you would want to purchase alongside with this. In terms of efficiency, that would be a different conversation. But in terms of applications and in terms of use cases, there are quite a number in those three sectors.
So artificial intelligence in Kenya is no longer an abstract concept. We actually have adopted it, we're implementing it in various industries. And it's quite interesting because the World Economic Forum actually estimated that by 2030, if we implement AI into our economy, it could lead to a boom of $15.7 trillion US dollars. That's quite a huge estimation. But then if you look at it, there's a digital divide, obviously between the global north and the global south. So in particular for Kenya, are we living up to this expectation? Do you expect by 2030 you would have been able to use AI to boost our economy, or are we still punching below our weight?
There's actually innovation in Kenya. What Quincy was saying, for example, there's an innovator called Tony Ndungu who's coming up with an app on curriculum development that can help a teacher and a student, instead of a teacher spending hours on end developing hard copy curriculum, the teacher can go into this app and say which class is he or she teaching, and then it provides the lesson plans. You'll find that in fintech, especially in Kenya, there's a lot of fintech products being used that are locally developed. Even in the region, you'll find banks in different countries say, oh, by the way, our core banking system has been developed or is being managed by Kenyans. So it's there. So the challenge is that perhaps these products have not reached the notoriety of the chat GPTs, of maybe social media like Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, etc. But it's being developed. But I think maybe the question to move further is how can Kenya scale to reach a level whereby these products are perhaps internationally known. Unicorns. I think people are looking for a unicorn. You see that $1 billion idea, that $1 billion company, and maybe that's it. So the challenge is also that it's also resource intensive to come up with these solutions. You require, of course, the developers. You need the data. You can either collect this data yourself or purchase it from somewhere. So that costs money. That process costs money. You will need individuals to label that data, mark the data. That also costs a lot of money. You'll need servers. You'll need cloud service. So the issue I'll say is that for us not to scale, those who are not being able to scale, it comes back to resources. And these are the example of resources. You'll need people like lawyers to take you through the contracting process. You need to deal with issues of intellectual property, issues of cybersecurity, issues of privacy. And all this costs money. But even with that, we do have local techies who are actually developing AI solutions that are actually in use.
It's interesting that you mentioned that you need people, you need lawyers, with regards to the legal issues that may come up, the IP rights, you need data annotators so that they can actually label the data. So I'm asking you, Quincy, currently, do you have local talent that can be able to actually take up these jobs? Or do you have our local universities actually skilling our young people to be able to take up these roles in the future? And in case we don't, what can we do so that we get there?
The talent is locally available. We have so many schools that are now offering courses on AI, the coding aspect, and now the teaching the compliance aspect. Moringa is one of them. It teaches so many students on AI, how to code, how to program them. University of Nairobi recently signed an agreement with Google to do an AI literacy skill. And also we have Strathmore doing the CPIT program, with now in line with the alignment and the AI safety, which is a positive endeavor. We have like labs like ACE Kenya, which are currently conducting so many trainings regarding like how to program, how to build AI systems. I had the pleasure of working with two individuals really brilliant, Wenceslas Ouma and John Ofula. Their grasp of artificial intelligence before the excitement came about really made me think twice about my approach to policy and looking at the role of different actors within the AI development cycle. Equally, in terms of capacity building in the long run, the possible solution that I would float is it needs to be taught at every level, at every distinct level, because we're moving to the whole digital era where everyone is expected to have digital skills. Either you know the basic uses of a computer, to you know that if you violate XYZ terms on using digital platforms, you will either be banned or you'll be sanctioned. Currently, I'd say the challenges that are there is awareness. We have a serious issue with awareness because many people are not aware. John Deere is in the country and they're doing so much with their AI-driven tractors. They're helping farmers farm. And they've been here for, I believe it's close to 4 years. Awareness is a big issue because the majority of farmers who are found in Northern Rift Valley are not yet aware of this technology, that's it, because it would mean turnaround time and resources won't be so strained on one aspect of farming, and you tend to refocus it. So spreading awareness is one of the key problems because you do seminars, you do webinars, you do conferences, you do innovation weeks, but the target demographic hasn't really been reached out there. I mean, when it comes to AI, I consider it a tool. So how many people would actually benefit it? Like the people who truly could leverage their scenario using AI tools. And I'm thinking about in education, that child in Turkana who, if you're aware, every year NEC has a form of cutoff where children from marginalized areas with lower marks still get to attend top performing high schools. So with the introduction of maybe AI into those schools, will it now level the playing ground for them? So that is one of the areas that I think we'd focus on. Two, I think we ought to stop this fear-mongering because I always kind of indicate there are three types of people in the AI space: the early adopters, the fear-mongers, and the ones who adapt to it. We have to choose a stance as a country. Like, are we going to adapt to it? Or are we going to continue fear-mongering? Because the reports are true. The injection of about 15 trillion into the world economy is accurate. But as it stands, there's a lot of gaps, especially in policy and regulation, and which approach to take to either integrate AI to one's economy or either a way to make sure that it's properly utilized that's going around. And a huge chunk of it is just down to we need to sit down and come up with a one outlook of, do we really want to regulate using risk-based? Do we really want to regulate using prescriptive approach? Or do we really want to do liberal? I mean, it all depends with the general temperature of the country when it comes to the acceptance. Our local legislator, Marianne Ketani, has a motion in Parliament about talking about artificial intelligence. I think that's a good place to start. After that, private developers and individuals could focus on outreach programs. I'm happy that I was part of the current Ignite cohort who happened to train us through not only how to prompt, but how to build projects using AI. And ordinarily, the turnaround time was around 3 months for us. I learned quite a lot. And see if we have that way of integrating it into multiple facets of society, I believe that is what would help us a lot. Otherwise, in terms of challenge, are we really receptive to it? In every scenario, there's always the aspect of resistance to change. So what is the general consensus about AI?
So before you delve into regulation, I'd like to take you up on something that you mentioned, AI-driven trucks. That is actually quite interesting. And I was having a conversation the other day regards the data that is used to train AI systems. So most of the data that people argue is from the global north. So there's an argument that using AI systems that are trained from data from the global north in an African landscape, will those applications be applicable in our context? So you have AI systems that are well and good, but are they actually applicable within the local context?
Yes and no. I like to be controversial on this. Yes, in the way that if we get a data annotator or a data labeler in this scenario, it will be easier for the companies to actually find out what data they are collecting is pertinent to train those systems. If I look at Tesla's model of autonomous driving, the use cases or rather the dangers that arose out of the first initial test runs were really apparent on maybe driving styles and patterns, terrain response, and we look at just the landscape, because you see roads in the EU or in the US are very well developed. Getting such data in Africa will require us, and I see it as a way of building our data privacy legislation, is first of all, do we have the laws to govern you collecting and people benefiting from this data? Because most of these companies will try bring their product here on Westernized data. So in terms of fragmentation, what particular data set do they require? 2, how many categories of data do they need to collect? 3, the people they collect this data from, how will they benefit? How will they benefit them? Then lastly, in terms of integration, will it be widely acceptable? Because I'm looking in terms of race, I'm looking in terms of geographical size, I'm looking in terms of diversity. There are not many categories of bullet points that are used to train the global north systems can apply to Kenya. A good example is there was this company in South Africa called Vula Vula. They were doing a multimodal system for audio where you'd speak in English and it would translate in maybe Xhosa or Zulu. And it worked so well, but when it came to scaling, they had an issue of trying to get multiple South African languages within that particular system. ACE Kenya was building a system where to translate things to Kiswahili. In terms of where it is right now, I am not certain. But such information is where now the fine lines will be in terms of training those models. And also, lastly, don't forget, we have the chips or the brains of the AI systems, the GPUs. In Africa, we're not manufacturing any of them. All of them we get from outside the country, outside the continent rather. And that would be like the first step for me to focus on. Like, we'd want to collect all this data, yes. Do we have enough resources to build these systems first? And do we have enough legislation to actually make sure that these people have receive their rights to this data which is collected?
To you, Daktari, so let's say we're driving an AI-driven Tesla, Githurai, that roundabout. It has been programmed to drive on the sleek roads of Europe or America. I mean, how would that even look like?
Even you and I driving through these areas is a challenge. So now look at an autonomous vehicle trying to navigate. I think as Wakili here said, they are trained in an environment that's quite well regulated. There are roads, there are signs, etc. So for us, you'll find that that sign, stop sign or speed sign, it doesn't exist. So that's a challenge. But just to add on the issue of the data is usually important too, because the issue of where is the data sourced, and like you said, you have to look at the issue of bias and discrimination. Is it well representative? I can give you an example. Many years ago, in Silicon Valley, they decided to use a vetting software to get engineers. Then they realized they're only getting white male engineers, no other demographic, no even white female, no even African, no Asian, etc. Because historically, the engineers working within Silicon Valley were white males from certain universities. So when it was realized this is an issue of bias. Again, data is important. For example, in the US, they have algorithm policing software. And you find that this policing software will predict that the crime will be higher in the black neighborhoods. Well, essentially, the crime is higher in white neighborhoods. And it will identify black individuals as being potentially criminal because of the history of the country. At one point, this facial recognition being used by the police, it identified the wrong person because this person was black. It couldn't tell the difference between this. Smartwatches, I think it was last year, it was realized that the smartwatches where they get your heartbeat, your movement, that for black skin, even those oximeters, the oximeters that we're using during COVID, it was said that some of them were not accurate if your skin is darker because they had been trained on lighter skin. So then it means that ideally, which is quite expensive, to train these AIs, the ideal situation is that, especially for some that you'll use across the world, is that you need to get data from across the world and test it so that this bias is not there. But even if you do that, the people who are labeling this data, they could also have their bias. So it's not just the data. Also, the people who are crafting the algorithms could have their own biases. The people who are marking and labeling and noting this data could also have their biases. We have people who call data brokers. There are people actually who sell data. Then it becomes a legal and moral and ethical issue. Where do they get this data from? If you're buying, it's because a lot of this data is gotten from the black market, if I may put it that way. Secondly, there's the issue of intellectual property. Like in the US, for example, a lot of authors and academics have sued OpenAI because they're saying OpenAI was using their copyright material to train their model. So the issue of AI becomes an issue. So how does this relate to Kenya? In as much as perhaps Quincy mentioned the issue of legislation. Of course, we don't have a specific legislation dealing with AI. In the EU, there are very, very clear categories on what AI solutions or systems are acceptable and which are not acceptable. But for us, you have to read different kinds of laws. I mean, you have to pick something from intellectual property laws. You have to pick something from cybersecurity laws. You have to pick something from the data protection laws. And these are the challenges that we face. Another issue that comes up is that, is there data in Kenya? Actually, there's a lot of data in Kenya or in Africa. For example, data from education, data from the health sector. Like, for example, the Ministry of Health historically has had DHIS, a lot of health data. If you are talking about security data, there's a lot of data relating to security within the justice system, within the court system, within the prisons, within the police. So we have this data. It's just the question is, how do we bring this data together for the benefit of developing the solutions that are relevant to us? If you talk about farmers, for example, the State Department of Livestock, Fisheries, etc., they have been tagging livestock in different counties. They have been collecting data about farmers. They have been collecting about input and output from farmers. So we really have this data. The question is that how do Kenyan developers, people working in this space, how can they harness or access this data? And it's for that reason, I think, so the Ministry of ICT recently launched a report from their technical working group and said we need a national data strategy, a national data policy to answer some of these questions, so that, because it's not that we don't have data, it's just that we don't know how to harness it, and we get systems that are trained by data coming from outside, and then those are the challenges that I have mentioned.
Regulation and legislation, and on that front, there's two schools of thought. The people who think that AI is still at its nascent stage in Kenya, and that being said, then there should not be stringent regulatory mechanism that might stifle innovation. Proponents of that school of thought would mention products like M-Pesa, which has grown because of a relatively flexible regulatory environment. Then there's another school of thought that have arguments like what you were mentioning, perpetration of bias. They'd want for us to go the EU way, have a regulatory framework that governs the use and the development of AI. So, taking into consideration our previous discussions of where we are at, what would be the right direction to take? What should policymakers take into consideration?
That's a loaded question. When it comes to regulation, the directive states when you're testing it, you test it at government facilities. You don't do it in private facilities because they need to see whatever algorithm you're profiling in that system, does it attain the predicted results first? Because you test it on a small scale with a controlled data set. Because the moment you release it, it has a self-replicating kind of effect. I'd take the Canadian route when it comes to testing. How that would fit in the Kenyan scenario is the Communications Authority Act. Just amend it to include a form of directive that testing facilities or lab facilities ought to be government controlled. Meaning, if the system goes wayward and you registered it for testing, you'd be told beforehand that indeed a system cannot be released for mass usage or mass adoption. Two, in terms of regulation, I think the Data Protection Act can benefit a lot from being in the AI conversation. I feel like data protection is the building block of any AI system. One of the things that I asked in the Data Governance Society platform was, we have the roles of a data protection officer. We have some countries or some jurisdictions have AI officers, but the role of an AI officer to me is too specialized, because to me, majority of AI issues falls under profiling and bias, which is already defined by data protection legislation. So with the whole resource constraints conversation, I think would benefit in amending some few clauses and segments within the Data Protection Act to encompass AI and automated decision-making system, give it more substance, give it more definitions for it to cover all this. Because also the ODPC is doing a fantastic job, and giving them more powers to, establish and to kind of enforce laws on behalf of ADM systems would be a good benefit. Then I'd jump over to China. There has to be a form of registry for all these systems, especially if they are going to be released in various sectors and if they are going to affect large mass of people, especially those who are faced by multiple biases or multiple discriminatory factors. The registry, whether it would be maintained by the DPC or the government, would be one thing. It would also mean forcing, and this is now coming from my legal background, the Kenya National Chamber of Human Rights, because it defines bias, but now we need to formally recognize bias now as algorithmic bias now, because algorithms will be the backbones of AI systems. So giving it substance, reinforcing it is my most prudent approach. Or whether we would go the EU AI Act way, I'm not sure in terms of capacity. We're still there in terms of classifying those systems, because the internet was created by the military. If military had privilege to build these systems beforehand, we would have probably a more structured way of classifying and identifying these AI systems. Also, it would be domain specific, because health data is sensitive personal data. If it started from then we could go the risk-based approach, which is the premise of the entire EU AI Act. If not, the best way to do this, especially now that we're facing economic turmoil, would be, why not go the liberal approach, the way America and California is doing it? Because for them, they want companies to build and to pay taxes and to inject that income into the economy, deleveraging us from our current situation. So it would have to be a mixture of kind of both, because majority of all these other methods which I analyzed would lean towards to one side, eventually it will lead to the form of discrimination and a form of abuse to AI regulation.
So what you're saying is that let the market take its course.
Yeah, let the market take its course.
Daktari?
I partially agree with what he said, but I also think we need to go to a risk-based. Where we need a law, for me, no. A law is not the solution for us now. But there are several things that we could do. One is to identify, like you said, I agree, which sectors are sensitive towards the use of these systems. For example, if you, I think it's the Pharmacies and Poisons Board, if you bring a medical equipment, it has to go through tests, it has to be passed. So there's a strict regime in that. But in a sector like agriculture, you'll find it's not as robust like that. In education, there's really nobody come to us, what are these devices or what are these products or systems, solutions that are being used within the education sector. So I believe that one way, for example, in government, in the UK, for example, use the UK as an example, they do have a directive on procurement of tech in government. That if you're procuring technology within government, there are very stringent processes that you must go through. So in government, I think we need maybe perhaps directives. The directives from cabinet makes a resolution that if you're deploying or using AI solutions, AI system within government, these are the principles that you need to comply with. And these principles will cover certain things. They'll cover, of course, the issues of data protection. There's issue data governance generally, because it's not just personal data being used. Issues of cybersecurity and safety, issues of intellectual property, issues of risk management, risk analysis and mitigation of those harms. So for me, I'll go through use cases of AI in different kinds of sectors and giving perhaps binding guidelines, because if it's guidelines or policies, it's easy to, as we evolve, then we're able to amend them or improve on them from time to time. As opposed to legislation, we know our legislative process is quite, it is what it is. But if we are able to come with guidelines, principles, strategies, and policies for different use cases that are in effect binding, have legal strength, because this can be done through directives in different sectors, and actually using the existing laws. Like he said, these directives could come under the Data Protection Act, they could come under the Computer Misuse and Cyber Crimes Act, the Kenya Information Communications Act, they could come if it's issues to do with competition. So we can use existing legislation and come up with directives and add guidelines. Then as we progress, then we can continue to ask ourselves, what is it that we need to improve? Then maybe some years down the line, perhaps we'll consider an environment like the EU. Do we need an act? Because we'll have tested our regulations, our guidelines, and say, what is it? Have we identified our high-risk cases, our low-risk cases? Then we are able now to say, okay, do we really need a law, or do we continue with this, with these guidelines? But also, as we are thinking about this, the challenge is that Kenya is that the elephant in the room is usually which way does Kenya face? Because drafting of these laws and this regulation also has a lot of external influence. The Americans, of course, will be very clear. We want liberal, open market, they'll say, do not regulate their algorithm, regulate the result of the algorithm, which I partly agree with. Because that allows for people to develop whatever. But also the development process is fraught with those issues I talked about, the IP, the data protection, the cybersecurity issues. Then we have the EU is quite strict, because for them is individual rights centered, where they say what effect does it have on the individual. They will regulate the algorithm itself. They'll regulate the development, the deployment, and the use, which I think for us within our system is quite strict. We are not there yet. Or you can have, like in China, Quincy talking, in China, the government controls everything. You have to register your algorithm, it has to be vetted by government, and if you don't meet certain criteria, they can actually stop you from implementing this algorithm. So finally, for me, I'll say, let's have some use case directives. Let's test them, let's see how. And also the question about locally, where we'll have directives of policies that actually boost the development of local solution. Because, for example, even the issue, you talked about the GPUs, even test beds. Test beds, they're not local. You have to get foreign test beds to test your solutions. That's also a challenge. But we have questions like Konza is being developed. Is that one way we can leverage
on existing frameworks?
Yeah, the existing frameworks that we can leverage it. And I think that to me is a way forward. But of course, there are different people who I think will say they want it liberal, they want it tightly controlled, or they want a hybrid. So I would say mine is some sort of mongrel of a hybrid.
A flexible approach.
Yes, a flexible approach. Because as I said, of course, the issue of even the initiatives like, for example, by Moringa, by Ignite, etc., you'll find that the funding is also not local. It's funded by someone from outside the country. So the question is, what local solutions? But let me tell you, recently I was in a forum where there was an initiative that was presented. So in Mombasa, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, through ECDE, so what the Mombasa government did is it developed a program to teach robotics and AI to children who are less than 4 years old, around 4 or 5 years old. And so they purchased the kits. They created those ECD classes in an environment that children can come and learn. So they are kits, they're what they call AI kits, something quite small, an AI kit. Then they also trained the teachers on how to do this. And they found that the students at that basic level are now able to appreciate technology, because there is issue that if you give a 4-year-old, 3-year-old your phone, you're getting, I mean, how do they get to Dr. Pepper or something? I mean, like Peppa Pig, and they're like, they don't know English or anything, but they're able to get it. So Mombasa County realized that through these initiatives, one, they're able to get more children out of the streets and to learn these skills. They even did a hackathon or a symposium for these children to come and display what they had learned. And I think they said for that just initiative where they had, I think they reached about 300 or so students plus the infrastructure, etc. It cost less than 13 million shillings. So if this can be done in a county like Mombasa, imagine what 13 million could do in all these other counties, because it just needs slowly, and you upscale this using these small funds. And they said this was 100% sponsored or paid for by the county. So if you're talking about skill development and we start at ECD level and build on it, it means that by the time this child is perhaps 18, they already know what are the ins and outs, the nuts and bolts of creating this system. So yes, it's possible. It just needs the resolution to say we've apportioned X amount of resources for this targeted, very specific, and you ring fence those resources. Say, we're not now going to use these resources, I don't know, to buy the governor a new vehicle or to buy drapes for the governor's mansion or something like that.
I think that's really interesting, you mentioning how just investment of resources from ECD level, how the impact of that could be in terms of appreciation of technology. And as we wrap up, gentlemen, I'd like for us to imagine what a future where Kenya has fully adopted AI would look like. Just a few minutes. If we didn't have issues with funding, if we didn't have issues with, data, how would that look like for Kenya? And even beyond that, how do we position ourselves to be a leader in the AI industry in East Africa? Quincy, you could go first.
My vision in particular would be most rudimentary tasks are left to be automated. We're talking about repeat purchases, timely payments of like subscriptions and stuff. Currently, in terms of where that would lead us in Kenya, I think, and maybe Dr. shares the same sentiments, our procurement system would really be transparent, because if you can leverage AI and blockchain.
But procurement system, automated.
I would automate it. I would honestly automate it, because
no, I'm just talking about how our psyche is.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, sorry for interrupting. Just you remember when they said that there'll be mobile courts and that if you're for a traffic offense, you'll pay directly to a pay bill. Yeah. So there's not going to court or something like that. What happened to it? It didn't last even 4 months.
That's why I'm leaning on blockchain. Because one really interesting thing, I had a chat with my friend Bill Okello, and he was showing me how revolutionary it is, because once you're part of that chain, even in a transaction, once it's done, that ledger is public to whoever has access to it. If the transaction did not occur as per that moment's initial intention, then multiple people can revoke or flag it as irregular. That's why, I lean procurement, AI, and blockchain. It has to be all those two elements together. If it's AI, it will definitely, we have human in the loop systems. Someone will come and adjust the algorithm, say no, you just suggest this pay bill number, and it directs it to someone's on private account. One area that I'm really hopeful, if we had adopted it, is education. Because truth be told, since every industrial revolution, is education has become cheaper and accessible. I mean, these days we have Udemy, you have Coursera, we have EDX. You're getting international accredited courses, and having AI systems now tailor-make this further is going to make education more accessible to everyone. And that's really my hope with a form of utopia where AI is adopted cross-board. A good one is transport. I imagine Kenya having autonomous vehicles. I don't have to go to a matatu and someone wants to run me off the road. It would just I'm alighting at town. Fine. There's the bus stop. I'm alighting in Two Rivers. There's my bus stop and I have to walk. Automating it, I believe, would create a lot of, or rather would minimize wastages, because you do realize a lot of our traffic actually leads in causing a lot of economic wastages, because the amount of time you spend on fuel, time, and trying to control it. I mean, even the cops would now be free to do other things and try and regulate other sectors. In the financial world, I think it would give more open access to credit, because if we have like different tier approaches, like the DCPs using it to vet your default rates, or if the microfinance institution actually do a background check on using an AI system, I think that would really benefit most people now, instead of not doing manual, where you have to go person by person, profile by profile, and it's still it still need a human element in it. Like, I'm not saying autonomy is fully it works on itself 100%. There'll be human oversight. I mean, random sampling is something that I've seen even in the US systems. Texas recently did it in, I believe it was a Compass system. Like, they recently did a test run at some university selection process, and it selected majority of students outside the normal Caucasian male stereotype. And that was a really good use case of it. Lastly, I think one sector that would really benefit would be agriculture. It might not be pertinent, but if I can be in Nairobi and my farm in Nangili is being farmed 24/7, and the machines just give me the data, they track the seedlings, the soil culture, the soil profile, it would really reduce the resource-intensive aspect of you have to be constantly there. That would be my ideal use case for maybe AI, in case there would not be any boundaries and blocks. So what was the last question?
How does Kenya position itself to be a leader in AI?
And I'll be biased on this, pun intended. Kenya has to really stop fear-mongering about emergent systems, because everyone wants to control it. Everyone wants to have a piece of the cake, and they want to control a majority of what the systems dictate, how they influence people. We should really embrace how time would be saved by embracing these technologies, because at the end of the day, AI is a tool. Like, I'm looking in terms of cost effectiveness. Time is a constant factor in all of this. Whether it's production, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's interacting with people, it would really help Kenya to adopt it fully. Whether we take the EU approach, whether we take the Australian or Chinese or US approach, would really depend with goodwill, because at the end of the day, if you want to deleverage an economy, you have to have innovation. We have a lot of innovation. So as a stumbling block, if we are adaptive to innovation to lead us to deleverage the economy, I think would be better off. It would be, I think we are termed the Silicon Savannah of Africa. It's the most common phrase that I've seen being thrown around. If we are to really take advantage of it, we really have to be receptive to artificial intelligence, meaning we fall to the people who adopt it fully, according to me.
So on political goodwill, I think Dr. would disagree on that point, but an AI utopia in Kenya, what would that look like?
For me, it's an environment that makes resources accessible to those who are developing these products, to those who are deploying these products, and to those who are using this solution. So that means capital being made available for these processes, and actually local resources, because those providing these resources out there are foundations, are public companies, private companies. So if they could support that within the local context, that will be a utopia for me. Then, of course, developing use cases and being able to identify the sectors. I think Quincy has done a great job at identifying some great use cases in health, education, agriculture. I will add security. Though security usually a very controversial one because of potential for abuse. But it's important. Making efficient public services, whether it's banking, insurance, just simplifying them, that will be for me. But at the same time, as we identify, having very clear processes on how to identify harms, how to identify risks and mitigate them, and providing effective remedies to people who harm may be occasioned or the risk has happened as had been predicted or not predicted. That will be ideal for me. And also having laws, regulations, or policies, whichever you call it, that don't stifle innovation. They allow for innovation, but also ensure that the law, for example, especially you're talking about, that fundamental rights and freedoms are not negatively impacted on. And if they are, there's a solution or a remedy for that. I know it's a challenge, but being able to be part of the table that is discussing this solution, because really now it's the US, it's EU, it's China that sit on the table and they are able to muscle their way around because of the scale and resources that they have of this. So for me, utopia will be Kenya being able to sit on that table, and able to inform policy, regulations, and also to bring resources to this. But as I said, I think you asked, it's the utopian kind of thinking, and also having Kenyan solutions having reached that quote-unquote unicorn status, that somebody in Brazil, somebody in Mongolia will be able to say, this product that I'm using is by some techies in Kenya, in the Silicon Savannah. I think that will be awesome for me.
So there you have it, folks. Artificial intelligence in Kenya, just how powerful and revolutionary it can be in transforming various sectors, healthcare, education, agriculture, and just how much efficiency will be achieved in this economy if you're actually able to adopt AI fully into our economy. So for more episodes such as this, keep it Velam.